Welcome back, everybody, to Nuts and Bolts Sports. Rod, Jordan, Henry here. Henry, we got to get an intro with you in it because I think that thing was made like before you started joining us regularly, and we got to get you in there because now you're sort of a regular part of this trio.
Yeah, people think I'm still the special guest or something.
I know, right? Every single episode, special guest. We're here. We're not talking about the NBA returns anymore. You know, we're a week out. Jordan was reminding us before we got on this broadcast that we're a week out of the NBA Finals. We've had a week without basketball. How's the celebration going a week later, Jordan? Let me ask you that first.
We're looking to next year.
Yeah, are you already?
We're looking to repeat.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. I like that mentality. And speaking of next year, what we kind of thought would be a good idea to do today, and we're obviously going to have a lot of these discussions sort of in the next couple months. Maybe every week we'll sort of be relitigating everything that we discuss here, and especially as we get into December and January when the season's actually about to start back up. But we thought we'd kind of like look ahead now that we've done so much sort of recap on what we've experienced over the past however many months, the bubble, all that kind of craziness. Let's look ahead to next season a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of storylines that we can kind of hone in on in this off season. And, while certain things like the free agency pool might not be quite as exciting as it has been in previous years, I think there's still quite a bit to discuss and look at. There's coaching changes, there's situational changes, there are injured players that are coming back into the fold for next season. There's just a lot to dissect over this off season, and we don't really know when the season's going to start. We're hoping January. That's kind of what it's looking like right now. Still no guarantees on that. So let's kind of start there with storylines. We'll get into free agency, we'll get into all that kind of stuff, but let's start with storylines. And Jordan, I'll toss it to you first. Like, what's sort of the big storyline that you're honing in on? Is it the sort of repeat conversation, AD, signing the big contract with LA, or is there anything else that you kind of got your eyes on in this off season?
To be honest, the Lakers situation, they have a lot of moving pieces, so that's going to play out however it plays out in the coming weeks with free agency and the draft and whatnot. But to me, I think the biggest storyline, and the one that I'm personally really excited about because I do enjoy watching them play, is what's going to happen with the Warriors, right? You have Steph Curry and Klay Thompson both have had extra time to heal. Steph was a hand injury, so not necessarily something that takes any extra length of time. But Klay with the ACL gets all this extra time to rest, all this extra time to be fully 100% healthy before he returns. Even a guy like Draymond Green, who looked a little old and tired last year, he gets extra months of rest. So I expect their big three is going to come out fresh, ready to go, obviously motivated, right? They went from being a 5-time consecutive finals appearance team to the laughingstock of the league because of their injuries and only winning like 15 games. But it'll be interesting to see how well they do. But we know they're not a finished product, right? They have Andrew Wiggins and a lot of other spare parts, if we're being honest. But they also have the second pick in the draft. The general consensus around the league is that they're going to probably trade it and look for a kind of a win now player, someone who's already established. The key is going to be whether or not Wiggins goes in that deal, or if they're able to add somebody somehow without giving up any of their top four guys. Preferably, obviously, at the center position. So they have a lot of moves to make, and I think if they play it right, they're right back in the conversation in the top of the Western Conference. I think if they kept this team mostly the same and just added like a center, a run-of-the-mill center in free agency, I think just having Steph, Klay, and Draymond back rested and healthy is, for me, enough to at least get them in the playoff conversation in like the 7-6 range. And then, who knows what could happen from there, right? We know Steph is capable of having magical seasons. We know Klay and Draymond are excellent players. So that's, to me, my biggest thing. I'm looking to see what the Warriors can do. Because as much as it would be competition for the Lakers, especially in their own division, it is fun watching those guys play. I have always enjoyed watching them play, no matter when they had Kevin Durant or not, when they were considered the quote, villains of the league with their super team. I enjoyed it. I enjoy watching their basketball. It's a good brand. It's a lot of passing. It's flowing. It's a fun offense. So I'm really excited to see what they're going to do.
I think you can't be a basketball fan without liking those Warriors teams just because of how fun they are and how, I've heard people say like, it's bad for the game, the 3-point shooting and all that. It was good for the game. That Warrior style of play was very, very good for the game because I quite frankly, and I don't have the experience of having lived through the 90s and watched those Bulls teams play. I think that Warriors team was the best team that we've ever seen in NBA history. I just don't think we've ever seen a team fire on that high, like an offensive and defensive cylinder. Like it's just, I think for me, it's unmatched. And that's kind of, I want to keep it on this. So Henry, I'll ask you, like, what are your thoughts on the Warriors? Do you think that, is that trio, that core trio that even before KD came in there, is that core trio enough to get them back to the finals, to the playoffs? Is the health situation still a question for you? What are you looking at the Warriors and what's your sort of thoughts on them?
Who's gonna overlook Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green? I don't care what people say. He's such a huge essential part of the Warriors' success because he's that grit, that is added to the team. Like I know we talk about how energy is such a useless way to describe a player, but he does bring that sort of energy and hustle and effort to the team that they desperately need because they're undersized. They don't have Andrew Bogut anymore. They don't have Harrison Barnes. They don't have that squad that they had, back in 2016 when they went 73-9. But who says they can't make the finals again? I mean, people are so quick to forget Steph Curry is Steph Curry. Like, I think he is the most recent example of a player that has changed the game because now in his tenure, in his 10 plus year tenure in the league is shooting more 3-pointers than ever at any point in history, and it's because of him. I mean, why do you think people started shooting from like 4 feet behind the 3-point line? When you're playing at a rec league or whatever, because of that man. So for him to have such a huge impact is because he's doing something right. 2-time MVP and everything. I don't know if you guys saw the report, but there's like mutual interest between the Warriors and Dwight Howard. So I want to know your guys' take on. I know Jordan laughed, and he's not a huge Dwight Howard fan, but call me crazy, but I think Dwight Howard is what the Warriors need in order to have like a solid big man. He's not going to space the floor. He's obviously not going to do that. But to have that presence down low that's going to be able to defend, especially in the league that's mainly kind of undersized now, but going against players like Joel Embiid and all them that are 6'11" and taller, they need a player like Dwight Howard. And who says Dwight Howard can't ball anymore? Probably Jordan.
But he would weirdly be serviceable. Like he would do a job up to a point. Like, there's a limitation with Dwight, right? We know that. And I know Raj is probably chomping at the bit with something as well. So, but I would say like I think he could be serviceable. And it'd be one thing where like I'd almost rather keep Dwight on like another minimum deal than lose him to the Warriors where like he could like come back to like he could have one of those like 14 point 10 rebound games in the playoffs that we'd have to deal with. But Raj, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Dwight is pretty interesting, and it's mainly because we saw players like JaVale McGee, who's with the Lakers now, like succeed probably to the best of his entire career with Golden State. And you're playing, when you're playing, it's weird because like the whole entire Warriors scheme and system is to spread the floor, and Dwight Howard is not going to do that. But JaVale McGee didn't do that either. It's not like Zaza Pachulia did that or Andrew Bogut even did that. Those guys worked well in that system. The difference between somebody like a Dwight Howard and a Andrew Bogut is Andrew Bogut can move the ball and is a good playmaker from like the high post. Dwight Howard is not that. I think he can become that, especially at this stage of his career where he's not moving as quickly. He needs to kind of develop that as part of his game. We haven't seen him do that. Does he have the potential to do it? Maybe. I think if anybody can sort of build that into him, it's going to be Steve Kerr, and it's going to be that system because it seems like, we talk about the Heat system. I think there's no other system that anybody buys into more than that Golden State system. Everybody that's gone there has seen success, and it's because they're such a well-coached team. And you put them around star. I mean, Henry, you talk about the way Steph Curry has changed the game. He's changed the game in terms of how people in the NBA play. He's changed the way that young kids go out there and play. Like, you see 5-year-old kids that are 3 feet tall shooting 3-pointers from 5 feet behind the line, like you said, and airballing it, but they're trying it. But also he's changed the way that the entire NBA has to play defense. And the reason that Steph Curry is such a threat, why he's impacted the league more than any other player, as much as LeBron, if not even more than LeBron, it's because of the way that he plays. He's just such a dangerous threat from anywhere on the floor. You can't give him any space. You have to have somebody on him at all times. It's not like you can play zone against Steph Curry. Like, that's just unacceptable. You have to have somebody within 2 inches of him at all times, and even then, he's probably still going to nail it in your face. He's just that much of a threat. Then you put players like Klay Thompson around him, like who's just as good of a shooter. Like that's kind of crazy to me that those two guys are paired together. Like generational talents in terms of shooting. The fact that those two are on the same team is dangerous. It's dangerous. But it does come down to, those Warriors teams, even look beyond the KD teams, the teams that beat like those Cavs teams or challenged those Cavs teams in those couples finals back in 2015 and 2016. They were deep. They were deep. They had such good guys coming off the bench. I mean, you think about Leandro Barbosa, Andre Iguodala. I mean, we just saw him sort of have success a little bit here in Miami as well. Like, those teams were 8 to 10 guys deep in the playoffs. Like, they tightened their rotation. It could still run 8 to 9 guys in the postseason, and they just can't do that anymore. They can't do that anymore, and that's the biggest sort of factor. We're going to get into top players later on in this episode of like who we're looking at into next season. And Steph Curry is a top 5, if not top 3 player in the league. Even if he is a little bit injured, I think if he's nearing healthy, sort of Steph Curry, he's a top 3 player in the league. And that could be enough to get him into the playoff hunt. I don't know if it's enough to get them like sort of in that top 4 echelon of the Western Conference, just because it is so competitive. I don't know if either of you have any follow-ups on that.
I
Took
think
only. It's only
I think they're.
For those of you who had
No,
over
wait,
under
wait.
12 minutes, the under hit.
when Raj brought up the Cavs, I was like, some way, somehow he did it. He brought up the Cavs. But no, like I think people are they're just quick to forget. I think people were quick to forget, like not to go off on a little tangent, but John Wall's, he's been out for a long time, but the type of player he is, like John Wall. He's a great player. I don't care what people say, but same thing with Steph Curry. He's been out for such a long time that he even came back at one point in the season, and then he had like a 30+ point game. He's just so well developed. Like that's the thing. It's just a factor. It's just like people are quick to forget when they come back. I can see the Warriors being seated higher than the 5th seed in the West. Then that means there's gonna be a couple of Western Conference playoff snubs, like some hard ones, because obviously the Kings, I don't know what's going on there. Don't even put them in the mix in there. But when you have the Pelicans are on the rise, Zion Williamson and all of them, are they gonna make an 8th seed? Now with the Warriors back, or who else was like in that stretch? The Blazers. The Blazers,
Phoenix had that hot stretch.
So, like,
they had that hot stretch at the end of the bubble. So
what's going to happen now with the Warriors back, like fully healthy? Draymond needs, obviously, he needs Stephen Clay, but when he's on the floor with them, he's an unstoppable offensive force, but he's just so well mixed into the system, especially been playing with them now for that 5-year run in the finals and everything. They don't have players like Leandro Barbosa, Maurice Spates, and how you said like how deep they were in those championship runs because they gave up so much for Kevin Durant and everything, and now they're facing the repercussions. And hopefully Andrew Wiggins can come into his own. I don't really see that happening. I feel like his confidence got broken by Jimmy Butler. I honestly. So we'll see what's gonna happen there. And obviously Steve Kerr. I don't want to really look at him as like he's the answer because like when you have Steph and KD on the same team, what do you expect? Like you don't really have to. Do you have to really coach a lot? No. Like it's like a Ty Lue and having LeBron on there, But he has.
Did you just compare Steve Kerr with Ty Lue? The disrespect to Steve Kerr.
No, like.
Well, here's what I'll say about that, Henry. Actually, in response to that, like I think what Steve Kerr actually, I mean, Mark Jackson, and I've talked to you guys about my personal disdain of Mark Jackson as a personality, I guess, in the basketball sphere. Let's just call it that. Mark Jackson had a similar team to what Steve Kerr did. And Steve Kerr elevated that team like 15 to 20 wins in his season, that first season there. And it is because Steve Kerr is a great coach. And the thing with shooters, like shooters need space and they need to be able to create. Steph can create space for himself. Klay Thompson can kind of create space for himself, but not in the same way that Steph can. What Steve Kerr did for that team is he opened and spaced the floor in a way where Steph was able to create his own shots, but also Klay Thompson was able to develop as sort of an off-ball scorer and then work that way into becoming an on-ball scorer and working on his dribble shot and being able to score in the mid-range and penetrate and attack the basket. So I actually argue that Steve Kerr is an excellent coach, and he really changed the scheme of the look of that team.
All right, I didn't mean to compare Steve Kerr to Ty Lue. That's on me.
No,
I feel bad for that. But
I feel
it was easier. It was easier, obviously, when you get Kevin Durant, right? You can plug him in for Harrison Barnes, and life becomes much easier. I do agree with that point of it. But Kerr is. I mean, I think he came in and just changed, like I said, the offense that they were running and made everything so much more fluid. I mean, that first year when they won it in 15. It was like a totally different Warriors team. And then obviously 16 was like the pinnacle of that offense, just humming. But even when they got KD, you thought, how much better can they get on offense after that year? And they were just as good, if not better, really historically, because they obviously had
definitely better,
and they just plugged and played everybody, and then they, like you said, they had the deep bench and everything. So it'll be interesting to see. Kerr, like they have some work to do. They're kind of, I don't want to say underdogs because like that implies that they're like way out of the running, but they're definitely not the favorites or talked about as much for the first time in 5-6 years. So it'll be interesting to see how they respond, what they have, in terms of their mental toughness and wanting to kind of play with the chip on their shoulder. It's always interesting to see when teams play with that. So it'll be cool to see.
Yeah, Henry, what storylines were you kind of looking at and sort of preparing for this episode? Was there anything that you honed in on?
Yeah, I think that was the main one because, like I said in the last episode, I really expected Steph Curry to come into this season that just passed, as the MVP before, the pandemic and the injury and everything, because I'm like, okay, KD's out. We saw what Steph Curry's capable, of a team that solely revolves around him, being the sole superstar. Obviously, Klay Thompson is an all-star, but he's not a superstar like Steph Curry. So I think that's like one of the main things. The Timberwolves, they're looking past Anthony Edwards. We talk about how this draft class is, probably one of the weakest ones.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Just say this
memory. So when I hear players like who are some notable players? Anthony Edwards, LaMelo Ball, LaMelo Ball in the Knicks. Is that a storyline for you guys? Can that
it's
be
a storyline? I don't know if it's a good one.
It wouldn't surprise me, but like at the same time that's like a grade A dumpster fire waiting to happen with LeVar Ball and Dolan. Like if he goes to the Knicks, we play the game of over under, like how many games till LeVar gets banned from Madison Square Garden. Like that's what starts to happen.
I can't wait. Honestly, that sounds exciting if you ask me.
Yeah. We saw what happened with Lonzo Ball and everything. So like, not to discredit him as a father who pushes their sons to get to that point, and like there's not a lot of players that make it to the NBA, so props to that. But he did hurt Lonzo's career in LA. He said LA's not going to win a championship if they get rid of Lonzo. What happened?
Oops.
Exactly.
sorry, LeVar. You did the best you could. You tried to curse us, but I do want to point out as this popped up, I did see this. I did hear a rumor, and it wasn't like some BS. Golden State is obviously looking to trade their pick, right? They're probably trending towards a win now player. But Minnesota was reportedly kind of moving the same direction because of Towns. Right? You're worried that Towns could be, he could be leaving soon. I don't think that's ever happened. The top two teams trading their picks in the draft. But two, like how crazy would that be to see? Like you think about it, normally landing the first or second pick is a luxury, right? It's like if you're not going to win, you're not going to make the playoffs. Okay, you tank and you get this first pick, you win the ping pong balls. But to have both teams trade their top two picks potentially, I think it's just really interesting. It's interesting to see what they would get for him. The value is obviously not quite as high as it would have been even a year ago. Obviously, with Zion, it would have been through the roof. But it's just really interesting that both teams are considering it given their positions. I think it's just a very unique situation. It'll be one thing that makes the draft interesting because I don't think the draft is going to be very exciting. I don't think the talent's that deep. I know Raj is not a big college guy anyway, so he's not already interested. But I think it would be cool to tune in and be like, have Adam Silver or whoever come out and be like, hey, both teams traded their, the Wolves traded their pick, and then 10 minutes later you can be like, hey, Golden State, ship their pick to wherever. I think that'd be something to watch as well.
I'll just throw this out there as my second Cavs reference. We'll trade Andre Drummond for either of those two picks. Happily trade Andre Drummond and his massive contract for either of those two picks. I kind of want to move on from the Warriors because we've been on them for almost 20 minutes. And the last thing that we mentioned before that was the Lakers. And I'll be the one, I guess, to bring up the Lakers. Do they repeat here? Because I think, we're kind of we've been talking a lot between the three of us sort of in our messages, and one thing that we honed in on, I think it was mid last week or whatever, was Rondo and his he hasn't officially opted out yet, but all signs are pointing to him opting out of his contract, and I think that's a pretty big loss for this LA team. I mean, we saw that role players already struggle, especially when it came down to shooting and whatnot. Like without Rondo, that team does not win a finals. I think, or at least they're challenged much harder to win that final, especially by that Miami team. That could be a serious problem for them if Rondo doesn't come back. So Jordan, I'll ask you first, I guess. What are you sort of looking for to either replace Rondo, or do you think that LA needs to put some money behind trying to get Rondo back?
Well, it's tough because, financially they only have, I think, their mid-level exception and, the vet minimum deals. And I think that's pretty much it, except for maybe like a trade exception. So they don't have a lot of room to create money necessarily. Obviously, Rondo was very huge to their playoff run, and we thank him for the playoff Rondo moments that he gave us. He really was impactful in so many different ways. I don't blame him for opting out. First of all, I would have done the same thing if you'd come out there at age 32, whatever he's at, and you have a stellar postseason. I mean, you're trying to secure yourself, trying to secure more money and more contract years on the market. So it'll be interesting to see. Maybe he and the Lakers, especially again, he's raved all offseason since they won about how exciting it was to play with LeBron, how he wanted to play with Anthony Davis, his buddy from the Pelicans. So it's not like this is a disgruntled guy leaving this team. I think there's a world where maybe he can give them some sort of discount for maybe like a 2 or 3 year deal to kind of keep him there where both sides can kind of meet in the middle. But if he doesn't, which is also likely, I think it's a pretty 50-50 thing at this point. I know the big thing that's been tossed around is some sort of Danny Green and a first-round pick and player X for Derrick Rose, which is it's so interesting. Like again, we talk about if you go back to 10 years and you said that LeBron and Anthony Davis would be winning a championship for the Lakers, anybody in 2010 or 12 would have told you you're crazy. But if you go back to high school Jordan and be like, hey, Derrick Rose might be on the Lakers in 2020, I would have been like, really? You mean like the 6-time MVP coming up? Obviously, his career didn't go that way. But it would be very interesting to see if LA would pull that off. Rose, in fairness, has had 2 pretty good years. He really had a resurgence there with Minnesota and has played, I think, just as well with Detroit. He's worked on his shot a little bit. He's been able to stay a little bit more healthy. Obviously, he got past that really rough stretch. His defense is going to be what it is, so it's definitely a loss there if you're replacing Rondo with him. But it would be a nice boost, right? Especially whether he plays off the bench or whether he starts with LeBron. It definitely takes a load off, right? Rose is someone that can run an offense, that can put the ball in his hands and just say, hey, I'm going to try and get us a bucket here. I know that's probably the biggest one because they're not going to have the money for the Van Fleets and even like the Bertans of the world. They're not going to have that kind of money. Obviously, the other one is the Chris Paul trade that everyone keeps harping about, but that's also pretty complicated. As interesting as that would be to put Chris Paul is probably the best point guard of this generation with LeBron, who's arguably the best player of this generation, would be something, especially as their buddies, right? It'd be really cool to watch. But at the same time, it would require like Danny Green's contracts and like 4 other guys because he makes so much money. And that injury risk, I think, is still there. And it'd be, I don't know how I feel about it yet. I want to wait and see what the potential offers are, and I want to see how everybody else shakes up. But I'm not as in love with it as everybody else is right now.
I'm a big proponent of the Chris Paul trade because I just want CP3 to get a ring, and the best chance he has to get a ring right now is to go play with LeBron. What if you do like sort of what you're talking about? You kind of mix and match, sort of like that Danny Green contract, a couple other additional expiring contracts, and package like a sign and trade with Rondo in there. Could you see that being a possibility? Henry, I'll ask you first, actually.
Jordan, I wouldn't be as worried, like Jordan. I mean, like Rod just said, like I want to see Chris Paul in the Lakers. I know there's like it's a lot more complicated. It's easier said than done, especially with all these contracts and everything. Especially Danny Green's contract. I think that's the most complicated one to deal with right now, and especially
so damn low.
Yeah, he's like the memes I see. He's stealing $15 million a year from you guys, but the name of the game. You expect more from these type of guys, but when they don't produce at that level, you're essentially wasting that type of money when you can, offer a package and everything, to get players like, I just want a little clarification. Are you worried about Chris Paul's injuries?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Not that I wouldn't be Derrick Rose. Like, don't get me wrong, Derrick Rose carries plenty of injury concerns, but for how big that Chris Paul contract is, we're talking like, 40 million, 38 million, whatever he got.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, his 2 years in Houston, he got hurt both times. It was the hammy or the knee or whatever in the conference finals. Was the conference finals both years? I believe, right? That he ran out of gas, and everyone's like, "Oh, well, he was healthy last year." Yeah, because the Thunder didn't make the conference finals. I would not have been surprised if he would have gotten hurt again. It stinks. It's a shame that he has such great seasons and he's been still putting up great numbers at this stage in his career. But it's something that is in the back of my mind. If you trade all that, even for all the crap I give Danny Green, like at least your best asset to any team is availability, and that's what LeBron James preached all of postseason, and that's why he's never missed a playoff game. And for all the crappiness that I endured with sometimes with Danny Green and some of these other guys, they were available, they were there to play. If you put all your chips in the Chris Paul pot, and you're left with like LeBron, Chris Paul, Anthony Davis, Caruso, Bradley, and like fillers, and Chris Paul goes down. Now you're putting 36-year-old LeBron, putting more pressure on him, putting more pressure on AD. They got to play more minutes in the regular season. It's a risk. It could pay off in the best way if they're able to manage Chris Paul's minutes. And I don't know how many games they're going to play this year. If it's less than 82, that might be more beneficial. But like if they can manage the minutes where he's only playing like maybe 27 to 29 a game, he does a couple of load management games and he's rested for the playoffs. I mean, we know how good Chris Paul is and how good he was even in that first round series against the Rockets. He was the reason they got to Game 7. Mm-hmm. So it could be very beneficial in that regard. But at the same time, I don't know. I'm a risk versus reward guy. And I always tend to shy away from the bigger risk, and I don't know. I want to see what happens with some of their other signings first, but I'm sure it's something we'll be discussing in future episodes because the buzz isn't going away anytime soon.
This is the last year of Chris Paul's contract, correct?
I think so.
Let me check.
Okay, if it is the case, then I would actually, I am sort of leaning towards maybe them signing him on a vet min the year after, just giving him an extra year. I know he'll be a year older, but he'll
Hey, Chris Paul, come to the Lakers for $700,000.
I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, especially if Chris Paul is sort of like, he's gunning for that ring. He's ring chasing at that point in his career. Like, he's only got a year or two left. Like,
he has a player option next year.
So he could opt out
after next season. So he's got the contract this coming
year. How much is he going to be giving up?
So this coming year, $41,358,314. So just shade above $41 million. And again, you think about him, LeBron, and AD. That's beyond the. I think the other thing too is you're looking at luxury tax at that point for anybody you want to have on the team, which is like. That's always something that teams always kind of fret about as well. So there's a lot of moving pieces with Chris Paul that we'll see.
Well, if he does opt out, like we said in our sort of private chat, like Chris Paul doesn't need the money. He's got the State Farm money. He doesn't necessarily need that $40 million. I know he wants the $40 million. I don't know. That is an interesting case. What else can LA do to sort of pad their bench then? Because I'm looking at this sort of free agent market. Like there are some solid guys there, but I think like anybody that you want to go get is probably going to cost you money. Like even somebody who could have been a decent sort of shooting piece who showed promise later in the season, like Jeff Green, now kind of wants to get paid because he sort of had a coming out party there at the end of the season. Like, it is kind of a weird situation for the Lakers. Is there any way they improve, or do they kind of just stay constant in terms of talent?
I think that the best chance, I think there's multiple pieces of the pie that could come out, but I think the best chance of it happening is that the Lakers run it back with obviously LeBron and AD once he resigns. I think the guys they guarantee to have in the books, you have Caruso and you have Avery Bradley, who was also a pretty valuable piece for them last year. So you have those guys. You have Danny Green, and then that's what 5 guys. I think from there, there's going to be you got to think there's got to be 1 or 2 guys that are going to bring chase, right? Guys are going to sign at a discount. So we'll see who those guys are come December. So that's 7, and then they'll just fill it out. They have their own draft pick. We'll see if they trade it or not, or if they keep it. So like. They're going to fill it out, and I think it's going to be that classic LeBron year. I think it's going to be like the 2017-18 with Cavs. Remember how that went? When they started the season. D-Rose and Wade, and like midway through the year, like I don't think the Lakers are going to be struggling quite there, but I think LeBron, and let's be honest, LeBron has just as much influence in the GM office as Pelinka does. So they're going to run it back with most of the guys that they can get, and then. I think that if something's not working to LeBron's liking midway through the year, that's when Danny Green and a pick gets shipped out for Derrick Rose, or if Chris Paul becomes, whatever the situation is, that's when, whatever the new trade deadline used to be February, now maybe, March or April, whenever that new deadline is, that's when you might see the Lakers shake it up. Because LeBron's like, hey, go out and get this guy for me. And that's when they'll make it. I think that's the higher percentage of what could happen as opposed to them trying to assemble the perfect team in the offseason. Because I think that's pretty hard to do in general, unless you luck into like the Warriors did with KD. It's pretty hard to make the perfect team. You know what you need by the middle of the season more so than you do at the beginning of the year. So I think that's why I'm like not stressing about it, because I feel like whatever the Lakers do is not a final product.
Let's go across the hall to the other side of Staples Center and talk a little bit about the Clippers. We talked about we talked about how they needed to make a smart move with the coaching decision if they wanted to get better. They might drop this season after signing Ty Lue. That was the dumbest decision I could have
I won in the Jordan category.
I just don't. I'm taking points away from you for willing that into existence, because that's just atrocious. And then Chauncey Billups is an assistant coach. Like, what are you guys doing over there? Come on. Like, you are in a win now situation. And I know Ty Lue went and won a championship in Cleveland, but then he went and dropped off the face of the earth. And like possibly the only time in LeBron's career, or in his peak, that he was a 4 seed in the Eastern Conference of all conferences. And he wasn't even injured. He was playing healthy for most of that season.
Because they had D Rose and D Wade for half the season.
That was, Isaiah Thomas, like that team was just a dumpster fire. And like, I'm a little concerned about the Clippers. I think they could very easily drop out of the top 4 of the Western Conference. We're talking about we'll talk about other teams that are going to take a step up. Dallas is going to take a step up. Denver's already there. Does Golden State sort of jump back into the top tier of the Western Conference? LA, the Clippers are in trouble.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, Henry, I know you're a pretty harsh critic of the Clippers. What do you think about this sign?
I mean, I expected better, but like everything in this show that Jordan says always comes into fruition. So I wasn't surprised that they made the call. But can you guys see the players listening to Ty Lue? Like his coaching is it's not top tier. Come on, like let's be real here. He had a Kyrie, LeBron, Kevin Love team. Yeah, don't get me wrong. Again, I know like Steve Kerr, and Ty Lue probably had his system and his philosophy and everything like that, but he had the players too. He had the talent. Like if you plug him into the Pacers, he's not going to do anything. If you plug him into the Wizards, he's not going to do anything. Now he's plugged into a team that has a Paul George, someone that after they lost Game 7, he was trying to give a motivational speech to his players, and everybody just rolled their eyes. Kawhi, who is not the most vocal leader at all, which can really hurt in terms of like a leadership role and what the Clippers need in terms of who's going to take the initiative to be that person in the locker room. Because when Patrick Beverley does that, I don't think he really says a lot of things that make sense. Now you toss in Ty Lue in there. It's just that figure, like who do you want to look at as your leader in the head coaching position? Not Ty Lue. Doc Rivers, I still think getting rid of Doc Rivers is the worst decision they could have possibly made because Game 7 was not necessarily his fault. I know his record. I know losing 3-1 3 times in his career does not look good. But in terms of like who the players respected enough to follow his lead, it was him, but not Ty Lue. And not Chauncey Billups.
I agree with you.
Former Denver Nugget great Chauncey Billups, according to the Denver Twitter account.
Fair enough. No Melo on that picture, but Chauncey Billups.
Just Melo.
I mean, to be fair, Chauncey Billups was really good when he was in Denver, and that team.
Okay, but he was no Carmelo.
2 years.
They competed with your Lakers. They gave your Lakers a little bit of a run for their money.
Because Carmelo was giving them 30 a game.
Chauncey was good. I mean, AI was on that team too, and they were much better with Chauncey Billups than they were with AI.
Agreed.
I'll contest that. I watched a lot of Denver games. Trust me, so I know that team. That team was much better than people give them credit for, and it was because Melo he just couldn't get over that hump. I don't want to talk about that right now because that's a discussion.
Let's talk about Denver.
No, I'll happily talk about Denver. But I mean, I think Doc Rivers saw the sort of cards coming. Like, he stepped down from his role. He went to Philly, and he's like, LA, I didn't have success there, so I'm going to take the best coaching candidate off the table and bring him to my assistant coaching staff and bring Dave Yeager over to Philly to join the cast because I just don't. There was no really better options for them, and that's why I was a bit mixed on the Doc Rivers thing. I think that it was probably the right move, but maybe just the wrong time for it to happen. But the Ty Lue signing is just not enough for them to do it. And then, I mean, I assume that guys like Harrell are going to re-sign there and whatnot. But they do need to get a little bit deeper than they are right now. I mean, their rotation was tightened down to like 7, maybe 8 guys on a good day. But they made midseason deals to get like Morris and whatnot. They traded away some of their depth, and that definitely hurt them in the postseason. I don't know. Do either of you see like the Clippers maybe dropping lower? They were they were the 3rd seed this year, behind Denver, if I'm not mistaken. Do you see them dropping lower than the 3rd seed? I guess is the big question here. Yeah,
100%.
No.
I mean, it depends on what they do. Like, as much crap as I've given the Clippers, and we've all made fun of them for weeks now, as they've been in Cancun, is, at the same time, like, you still have Kawhi Leonard, who's one of the 3 best players in this game. Paul George is still 2 years removed from an MVP campaign and his top 3 defensive player of the year voting as well. So, like, they do have some pieces, and, like, they didn't have maybe as much time this year with the break to develop the chemistry and everything. So, like, I could see a world where they come out and they win, like, 54 to 57 games next year. I'm not saying it's likely, but like it's a possibility. If I were them, like if I was a Clippers fan, that's what I would be rooting for. I'd be rooting for all the things that they're talking about with the Lakers. I'd be rooting for, maybe not Chris Paul deal, but like, hey, is Derrick Rose available? Because they could clearly use somebody other than Pat Beverley bringing the ball up the floor. You can't have all the onus on Kawhi to make all the decisions because Paul George isn't nearly the creator that he is. So they definitely have some pieces to figure out. I think they could use another center. I think Zubac is absolutely worthless, and I thought he was on the Lakers. So like, and it's funny, you listen to like some of these experts, like I'm a big Bill Simmons fan, but he's always been like, Lakers, how could they give up Zubac for nothing? I'm like, because he's not that good. And so, and you saw it, he was picked apart by Jokic, and that you saw. I think that was like the biggest thing too. Was like the Clippers, if they didn't get picked apart by Jokic somehow, AD was going to pick them apart. So I think that should be part of their focus, right? You have these big guys in the West, and normally it's, we're transitioning over to the guards and the wings and 3-point shooting. But at the same time, there are guys in the West that will still bully you if they have any kind of size advantage. And those guys aren't going anywhere. Jokic is staying in Denver, AD staying in LA. I'm trying to think there's probably another. I mean, even like on night-to-night basis, like facing Karl Anthony Towns, like he's a huge mismatch problem for them. There are several dudes in the West that can give them issues. So I think that'd be, and I'm not sure like who really is available for them other than like, I know Marc Gasol's gonna be a free agent, but he's
planning on going overseas. He's planning on going and playing in Spain, actually. I think.
Oh, is he done? Okay.
He hasn't confirmed, but I did see a report on Real GM like last week, I think, that said he's planning on going and playing Barcelona.
Okay.
Marcus Cousins.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so maybe Boogie
Cousins,
comes. I mean, Boogie, like for all the jokes, like he's healthy. He should be healthy now. I know Paul Millsap be a free agent.
I could see Boogie re-upping his contract with LA because he's on the veteran minimum over there. So
yeah, absolutely. I think.
Does he get a ring?
Yeah, he's eligible.
He is eligible. If I had a vote, not a chance. He literally did not play a game for them. He literally got hurt for the season. Avery Bradley, 100%. He was a very valuable player for them during the year. Mm-hmm. But it was like the same thing with Dion Waiters. Like, does he deserve a ring for the Heat if they win? I was like, no. You screwed around for half the year and took gummies on a plane. You didn't do anything for that team. But yeah, I mean, so I guess with Marcus Gasol stable, you have like DeMarcus Cousins. You have like Paul Millsap, Derek Favors, Aaron Baines is out there. I'm just looking at the list briefly here. Yeah. So it's not like an amazing type list. Maybe I don't think Dwight Howard really want to just go across the hall, but like I guess that's an option too. But they definitely have some issues they have to address. I think it's crazy to think like a year ago we were all like, Clippers are going to win this whole thing and they're going to be scary and they're going to be a defensive juggernaut and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And now we're like, wow, they really have some holes they have to fill. I think we were kind of blinded by the whole just Kawhi and Paul George blitz to the Clippers. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. I mean, you really don't like Tyronn Lue. I think he's just okay. Like I'm indifferent about it, but I don't think he's going to win them really any games. So it'll be interesting. I think they could. I think their peak is as high, potentially, depending on how things shake out. I think they can go as high as a 2 seed, and I think it could go as low as like a 5 seed. I think they're going to stick right in there. I think there's a better chance of them getting home court than not. And if Paul George, it comes down to Paul George too. Like if he can get if he can figure it out, even for his greatness 2 years ago, he struggled in the playoffs with Oklahoma City, and he obviously struggled this year. So if he can step it up and be the second banana that Kawhi needs, that could be a different team. But they have some work to do.
Okay. Let's go ahead and go to the Eastern Conference now because we spent a lot of time on the West, and there's only really one team that I want to hone in on, like in
the Wizards.
Yeah, definitely not the Wizards. I don't know about that John Wall contract. It's the Nets. I think it's pretty obvious that it's the Nets. For me personally, I think they're probably the favorite coming out of the East. Whether or not they're the 1 seed, going into the playoffs, that's a completely different conversation. There's the chemistry thing. They're probably going to have their hiccups, especially at the beginning with a brand new coach and Steve Nash and their 2 stars finding their sort of, gelling basically there in Brooklyn. But if it comes down to the playoffs and I had to put money on somebody, I'd probably say Brooklyn is the one that I pick coming out of the East. I'm really excited to watch this Nets team just because I think Kyrie and KD is such a exciting sort of duo. I don't know if they're really going to gel well together. They're both 2 on-ball players. Like they're not going to want to give up a lot of those big possessions at the end of the games. You want to probably put it in KD's hands as long as he's healthy more often than Kyrie's, but Kyrie's going to be a pretty valuable asset, and Kyrie's got the ego stuff going on just as much as KD does. So it's going to be interesting to watch that part of it. But I think they're going to be probably one of the most, if not the most fun team to watch on the floor. And I think that they're probably, they could give the Lakers a pretty good run for their money in the postseason as well. I think that team is built to sort of handle this Lakers team in a good way. From guarding, they've got DeAndre Jordan still who could, he could put more pressure on AD than most anybody else did in this postseason. You've obviously got KD there to guard LeBron. Kyrie's going to put some pressure. I just think it's a fun team that I'm very excited to watch. And, now you've got a good team in New York again. I know it's not the Knicks, but in that market, in that Brooklyn market, I think it's going to be fun to watch. Either of you guys think that there's any, do you pick Milwaukee over Brooklyn, or is there any other team, Boston, still kind of making their rise? Henry, your Celtics, I think Boston probably has a better chance at contesting this Nets team than Milwaukee does, if I'm being completely honest. I don't know. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Celtics need one more piece. As much as I love Kemba Walker as a person, he just killed us so much in the playoffs. Like
he finally come on over to the side.
Jordan's just so convincing, Nah, but like just seeing him he became a liability on offense, and he became exposed. Especially being guarded by players like Jay Crowder.
Mhm.
That won't be a problem with players that are essentially taller and can take it to the rim. With force, he just got bodied and tossed around like he was a kid. He's a great player. I know I'm talking a lot of smack right now, but for the Celtics, obviously one more piece. The Nets, that's the whole thing, the chemistry issue. Like, how are they going to gel together? Because as great as KD and Kyrie are, I think the problem can be Kyrie. I mean, when Steve Nash got hired, he said they were talking about on first take. He said, we don't need a head coach. So then I'm like, it's already starting. The season hasn't even started yet. I'm like, oh my god, I'll see what happens because it's another potential dynasty that may go to waste. Where do we see that from? The 2012-2013 Los Angeles Lakers. Yeah, Jordan, I'm calling you guys out.
You had to, didn't you?
When Steve Nash and Dwight Howard came in, obviously on paper it looks Dwight Howard was in his prime. I know Steve Nash was aging and everything and up there and declining, but he's still Steve Nash, So you expected a lot more. They came in, they didn't do a lot. Kobe got injured and everything. I'm not saying that the same thing can happen to the same thing can happen to the Nets. It probably will happen, but it's just that chemistry issue. Kyrie and KD are both. Steph Curry had no problem giving up the big shots for KD. We saw what KD did against the Cavs. I forgot what game. I think it was game 3 when he pulled up from 3 and he stapled the game.
Right
in LeBron's face, right in LeBron's face. So for Steph Curry to give up those moments to KD, it worked out. They came out they were back-to-back champions.
Mhm.
Is Kyrie going to do the same thing, because he left the Cavs because he wanted his own team. He wanted to be the man of I saw an interview recently. They asked him, I was like, oh, like what type of parental role does LeBron have? This was like when he was back on the Cavs. And he just looked at that and he felt so undermined that he was like parental role. And he thought like, I have one dad and everything. He's like, so he knows his worth, he's not a kid to LeBron or anybody that he'll succumb to in the roster because he knows his worth. He knows his talent. He knows he can be the man, but that's a problem too. When you have a player like Kyrie, with KD, maybe there's games with Karis LeVert is on fire, and he's willing to take the last shot of the big shot, but then, then Kyrie comes into the picture, and then Steve Nash is the head coach who's never had coaching experience before. What's up with great players ending up being such bad coaches, with no experience? Might that happen again? Probably not. Steve Nash, as much as a maestro as he is, as a point guard. Well, that's the case as a point guard, but as a coach, I don't know how much he can do for a KD Kyrie type of team that they know their egos are through the roof, especially now with KD having 2 rings. He knows, like, I know what I can do. I probably don't have to listen to Steve Nash or listen to Kyrie in that matter. So will they gel together? They'll probably gel a little better than the Sixers. I'll give them that. But aside from that, any other team, I don't know.
Okay, I think that chemistry thing will also be interesting to watch as the season progresses. Jordan, what about you on the Nets?
Yeah, I mean, the chemistry thing is going to be just like with any new kind of, I don't want to say, I guess they're a super team in a sense when you have 2 guys of that caliber. But anytime you put 2 guys like that together, I think there's pros and cons, right? The pro is that you have Kyrie and KD. So, like, worst case scenario, you have guys to go out there and get you points. And the biggest pro of all, which Net fans should be eternally grateful for, is this break that we had in the bubble. KD, whether he came back, I don't think he should have come back for the bubble, and thankfully they kept him away. But like, he got an extra 6-7 months now to recover from that Achilles.
Yeah.
And that's such a really, really tough injury to come back from. You've seen so many guys come back and either not be the same or just, Isaiah Thomas case, just retire back when he was with the Pistons. Like, it's a very difficult injury to manage because it's so much explosiveness that comes from that. But Durant getting an extra, 6-7 months, I think is going to be crucial. I think he's going to come back. He may not be 100% the guy he was, but I think he'll be damn close. Like, I think he could be like 96% of the guy that he was. 96% of KD is still better than 96% of the league. So I think that's going to be a huge boost for them. Henry brought up the point with, like, what about nights when Karis LeVert's on fire? I want to bring up the devil's advocate to that is, what if Karis LeVert is not on this team at the start of the year?
That's exactly what I was thinking, yeah.
And then may very well be. I think he performed pretty well in the bubble. I mean, he was carrying them in some of those games. He had a couple of big games himself. But I don't know if he's not quite the spot up shooter that some of the other guys that you'd prefer to have around KD and Kyrie because they're going to draw so much attention. And he's, there's only one ball, right? KD and Kyrie are going to be handling it most of the time. So you ideally want some guy that can play really well off the ball. LeVert may be that guy. He may not. He's never been in the situation. He's probably not. He's probably better suited, honestly, and for his career, he's probably better suited being on a team where he can be the focal point or the 1B as opposed to the 1C or beyond. So it'll be interesting to see if they, what kind of trades they pull up with, if there's a Victor Oladipo trade somewhere out there or some other kind of, I don't want to say star, but just very excellent third piece that can shoot the ball, play defense, create a little bit. Like they're going to be searching for sure. Same thing. They have Joe Harris, who's a free agent. I mean, are they going to go into the luxury tax to keep him? He's obviously a super awesome shooter and a serviceable defender. So it'll be interesting to see if they're willing to go into luxury tax to keep him. The Steve Nash thing, I mean, we'll see. Of all the big name stars that have become coaches, he at least, for example, Magic was a coach, right? He's obviously a top 5 player. And you think he'd be a great coach, and he wasn't. But Magic is Magic, right? He's very different. He's very exuberant, whatever. We saw that when he was president too. But with Steve Nash, I'll give him this. Steve Nash has been the ultimate team player his entire career, right? Caring only about spreading the wealth and getting everybody going. So I think there's a world maybe a 15 to 20% chance where he becomes the C+ version of Steve Kerr, where the ball he can convince the guys to move a little bit. The big thing is KD and Kyrie respect him, and that's huge because if they brought in somebody that they didn't like, I think the season could go terribly. But I wasn't going to say it. I was going to let you say it. But I think he does have their respect, which is huge. I think they are going to listen to him, despite whatever Kyrie said about taking turns being the coach. You gotta just brush off what Kyrie says.
He's Kyrie. He's Kyrie. He's going to go out there. He's going to try to shake up the media. That's what he does.
Exactly. So I think combining those factors, I think it'd be to Raj's question at the beginning. It's going to be interesting to see. I can't judge Milwaukee because I don't know what they're going to do yet. They're going to make some move, but we just don't know what that is.
We also know that this is kind of looking a little bit ahead, but in the Milwaukee sphere, we also know that the Giannis Supermax situation is also on the table for this summer. I know it won't impact this season directly, but it does impact how Milwaukee moves forward from here.
Correct. Absolutely. We'll see. The Sixers obviously have Doc Rivers as new coach. So there's a lot of shakeups in the East. Miami's not going anywhere either. They're going to be around there. If you think Jimmy and Bam and those guys got a taste of the finals and they're done, they're not a chance. They're going to be fighting onto that one. So it'll be interesting. I think they're definitely going to be a top 3 seed. Like Raj said, they may be the team to beat out of the East without necessarily being the 1 seed because of the taking time to gel and whatever injuries may play a part. But it's hard to imagine if Kyrie is healthy, which is a bigger question than I think people realize. And if KD is almost at KD form, I mean, you're trying to, it comes down to beating somebody 4 times before they beat you 4 times. And that'd be hard. If they make the right moves, it'd be hard pressed to find somebody that could do that in the East. So I would lean towards them as the favorite. We'll see what happens, though.
All right. Well, we're running short on time here, so let's try to move quickly. A couple free agents, things is there any free agents you guys have your eyes on? I know there are some big names, not a lot of huge names.
Van Vliet.
Van Vliet is probably the biggest name if you're going amongst these sort
Just
of.
Drake.
I listed Van Vliet, Bertans, Jeremy Grant, Paul Millsap, Tristan Thompson, Jay Crowder. Melo and Jeff Green. I mean, Tristan Thompson, if he takes a pay discount, he could be a solid sort of piece. And then, like you guys mentioned earlier, Oladipo being on the trade market, not being a free agent. Is there any player that you've got your eye on in terms of making a move? I feel like Van Vliet could be a key piece for that Miami team, but I don't know if Miami's going to pay him the money, and I don't know if he's necessarily.
They're holding their chips for the Giannis stake.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I think if Giannis wasn't available, or if Milwaukee was like, "Hey, we're signing the Supermax," I think that'd be a really good move for Miami. I think with Dragic also kind of being on his last gas as well.
He's a free agent as well, I think.
He is a free agent. So, as much as Dragic was so valuable at that team, he's also going to be 34, 35. Van Vliet's probably the biggest one. I'd just be very interested to see, where he goes. I think he's going to command more money than Toronto is willing to pay, and deservedly so. He's been great for them the last 2 years. The only teams that have big money there are the Pistons, the Knicks, the Hawks. It's what we call the usual suspects. But it'll be interesting to see what he values. This is the time where it's what do you value? Do you value the chance of winning, or do you value getting that big contract? There's a world where you can have somewhat both, and there's a world where there's a lot of doors that'll give you a lot of money, like the Knicks and the Hawks and stuff. But I'm interested to see what he does there. My only other big free agent was Anthony Davis. Oh yeah, he's opting out. He'll be back for a 2 or 3 year deal. And for those of you who don't understand salary cap, he's not going to do a 5 year deal with the Lakers because that's Klay Thompson money, which is about $50 million less than he could make if he does a 2 or 3 year deal and then does the years of service, which is like the supermax essentially. So don't be surprised when you see him opt out and then resign for 2 or 3 years. Plus LeBron's out in 2 or 3 years, so that makes sense that they both go kind of be free agents together.
Yeah, that's obviously the smartest move. Like even from a non-financial standpoint, like he's 27 right now, 29. You signed that massive contract year that pulls you through the end of your peak and sort of gets you into that sort of latter half of your career. So that's obviously what he's going to do. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Yeah, I don't know, Henry. What about you? Do you have any? Do you want Van Fleet to come and replace Kemba Walker there in Boston?
No, it's not who I want. It's who I want us to get rid of.
Okay.
Gordon Hayward has a player option.
Right.
He's
pay him to decline that.
He's not going to get any money out of anybody like the way that he's getting paid out of Boston. So there's no way.
I don't care. Somehow, please. He's just too injury prone. And then when he missed a wide open layup against the Heat in the last game, I was like, get this man out of Boston. Get this guy. Get Kemba Walker out of there. As much as a great player he is in the regular season, he just is the injuries. It's the injuries that's just slowing him down and slowing the team down. They needed him the most in terms of like having that core and pushing the Celtics over the hump. So I know he's not going to get as much money anywhere else in Boston, but Danny Ainge, I trust Danny Ainge in making the right decision, and persuading Gordon Hayward on what to do. Aside from that, can I see Van Vliet going somewhere else to compete for a championship other than Toronto? I feel like he'll be a good fit anywhere. He's really come into his own, as not just a solid player, but a great, would you guys call him a role player or a near all-star?
I think he's closer to an all-star than a role player.
Agreed.
Okay, yeah. So I feel like that's the type of player that Jordan was talking about earlier, where a team doesn't necessarily need an all-star, but they need something close to that. And I feel like Fred VanVleet would do that marvelously, anywhere else. Now, teams that need a third player to go over the hump, the Nuggets, the Jazz, they're like right there. So if they get that third piece, there's so many players in free agency. DeMar DeRozan's also a free agent, but what do you guys think of that?
I don't think that anybody wants to pay DeMar DeRozan right now.
All right. I knew that was the answer. I just want to
I feel bad for the guy, but yeah, I don't think anybody's going to pay him.
Yeah, but my thoughts, Gordon Hayward, please figure it out or get the hell out. Aside from that, just free agent.
Put that on a t-shirt.
That's my new quote. But aside from that, that's pretty much it. The free agency is Anthony Davis. I see him number one on the list on availability, but obviously he's not gonna leave anytime soon.
Allow me to beat Woj to it.
But those are my thoughts on that.
Okay. I'm going to call a bit of an audible here since we're approaching the hour mark. What do you guys think about pushing our top 10 players of next season to next week?
Yes.
Give us some content because I want to get into that.
There's a lot of debate that we got to have with that.
Yeah. So that'll give you guys a tease for what we'll probably be discussing next week. If not, then in the coming weeks, we'll be talking about that. But yeah, we're approaching the hour mark.
Is Colin second? Yeah. We'll do like the Mike Greenberg. Coming up next week on the Return to the NBA, Raj is going to tell you just why Colin Sexton is a top 15 player in this league.
You're going to be surprised that only 7 of my 10 guys here that I have listed are Cavs players.
Yeah.
And tune in next week to see which ones. But yeah, that'll bring us to a close for this episode. We've got a whole lot to discuss here in this offseason. We're going to probably be going every Monday. It's kind of looking like what the schedule is going to look like now. So come back and join us. We'll be talking to top 10 players going into next season next week. You can find all our social medias down there. Be sure to check out the merch store. I remembered this week just because Henry said t-shirt a couple seconds ago. Or you said t-shirt a couple of seconds ago. That reminded me, teamnbsmerch.com or go to Bonfire and search for Nuts and Bolts Sports. Come back and join us. Find Nuts and Bolts Sports on all social medias and go check out our website as well. And yeah, we'll be back here next week talking about top 10 Cavs. Come back and join us for that.